Before we get into these records in about 5 minutes, I just wanted to take 5 minutes to talk to you a little bit about measuring the surface of the earth, a practice we tend to call surveying. Surveying dates back to pre-biblical times. It dates back probably as early as the Sumerians. There are land records indicating distribution of land rights and so on, even in the Fertile Crescent. We all know or have heard in school, maybe you guys teach it in school now, but about the Nile overflowing every year and how they had surveyors that laid back out the fields and had the people figuring out and so on. We also know, for example, that surveying was heavily used by the Romans. They laid out their towns, new colonies and so on by surveyors. So the practice of surveying goes way back. And for the most part, it's essentially the same general skills. It's the measurement of direction and the measurement of distance. Either distance on a vertical scale or distance on a horizontal scale. So, surveying, as New Hampshire was first being settled, and the initial colonies were being settled, had risen to the status of having a surveyor's compass. This is called a circumferenter or a surveyor's compass. It is a device that sits on a tripod. Another device that was used instead of a tripod on many occasions was called a Jacob staff. And it's a single post that you drive into the ground. You have a point on that end, and then you set this on top of it as well. Then you have the compass part of it, which has the magnetic needle. When you're moving around, you lift the needle off the pivot. When you're ready to measure, you drop the needle back onto the pivot and it swings according to the gravitational field. And then you've got the sighting vane. So you'd be setting a direction, a magnetic direction. And then you have sighting vanes that tell you what that direction is. So you're sighting through one and then through the second one over the top of that compass. And you can set the direction that you're planning to go. Now, obviously, this is a magnetic direction. And surveyors, even in the 1700s, were documenting things like magnetic declination. Now, surveyors rarely base any kind of observation on magnetic declination. Typically now, it's either astronomical observations of true north or grid north that has to do with the state plane coordinate systems, which you may be aware of if you're geospatially inclined.
Brian, the eastern border of New Hampshire is not north-south.
That is correct. However, the surveyor that ran that line, or at least started that line, and was running with a compass, was following instructions by the Massachusetts governor, whose name was Belcher. And the governor had said, allow 10 degrees for magnetic declination, when in fact, at that particular time, it was really only about 7. So it's probably off by 3 degrees magnetic declination, but it was intended to be not a true north-south line.
Okay.
That's a more complicated answer to a simple question,
But it's not as a result of.
it's not as a result
Of magnetic declination.
That's right.
Okay.
So I've talked a little bit about direction. I also wanted to talk a little bit about distance. This is a surveyor's chain. It is also known as a Gunther's chain. There are actually several different surveyor's chains, but this is probably the most common. And you will read in older records, see on older maps, references to chains, to rods, to links. Well, here's a link. It is 8.92 inches long. It is 66 1/100ths of 4 rods distance. So what reason for this is, a chain is 4 rods in length. A rod is 16.5 feet in length. So a chain is 66 feet long. And there are 100 links on a chain. So every link is 66 1/100ths of a foot, or 8 inches, 0.92. Okay? That's where that all comes from. And that is your link. This is actually, in fact, a half chain. It's only 50 links long. It's only 2 rods long. And it was used in New Hampshire probably more than the true 4-rod chain because of the terrain conditions. Not only do you have some steep slopes, but you also have a lot of brush, underbrush, and so on that you have to work through, and it's just easier to work with a shorter chain and take more measurements than it is to work with a longer chain. But that's what you have here. Every 10 links, you will find that there is a, have I gotten to it yet? That there is a 1,
An extra link?
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There is an extra link in
Yeah,
here,
there it is right there.
right here. Go another 10,
Right there.
and there's an extra link. Just to let you know you've got 10 links. Typically, the way the surveyors use this, the surveyor himself would run the compass. They would set the direction that they're running the line, and then they would take a sight, and they'd say, okay, the pine tree that is up there about a quarter of a mile away, that's on line. And then 2 additional men on his crew would then take the chain. One would be at the back and would have a loop on his belt. One would be at the front and have a loop on his belt, and he would have 11 pieces of wood, and what we call an arrow. It's about this long. And he would stick one right in the ground, right where the compass is, and he has now 10 left on his belt. And he'd stretch out the chain and stick one in the ground. The man in the back is saying, move to the right, move to the right. Okay, now you're in line with that pine tree. Put it in the ground when you stretch it out at the full chain. And then the one in the back would move up, the one in the front would move forward, and then they'd go through that again. Okay, move to the left. Okay, right there, that's on line with the pine tree. Put it in stretch it out and put the arrow in the ground. The man in the back is picking him up. So when he has 10 on his chain, and there's one in the ground, they know they've gone 10 chains, 10 of these guys. And they can then mark it into the book that we did 10. rather than mark each one separately. And that would be called an out. Not a common term, but it's, they were out of these arrows, so it was an out. So they might do 12 outs or 15 outs, and that would be what it was. And then they could calculate from there how many rods and how many links they've gone. All right? Just so you know, when you see it reflected in some of these materials, now you have a sense of what they're talking about, sort of in an immediate sense. Okay.